Please welcome Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett.
Jasmine Crockett's recent appearance on The View wasn't loud, dramatic, or emotional. It was calm, controlled, and confident. But one sentence stood out and immediately caught attention across political media. "I know the numbers, and I know how to win." At first, it sounded simple, almost casual. But the more people replayed it, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a comment. It was a message. In today's political climate, most politicians avoid sounding too certain. They hedge their words, soften their claims, and speak in vague promises. Jasmine Crockett did the opposite. She spoke like someone who had already done the math. During the discussion, Crockett didn't rely on slogans or emotional appeals. She leaned into facts, voter data, turnout realities, and the practical side of elections. Her tone suggested she wasn't guessing about outcomes, she was explaining them. That's why this moment mattered. Political analysts quickly pointed out that when Crockett talked about numbers, she wasn't just referring to polls. She was talking about real voting behavior. Who shows up, who doesn't, and which groups decide close races. This kind of talk is usually kept behind the scenes, not said openly on daytime television. And yet, she said it plainly. What made the moment even more interesting was how comfortable she seemed saying it. No hesitation, no backtracking, just certainty. For supporters, it sounded like leadership. For critics, it sounded like a warning. Social media reactions reflected that split almost instantly. Some viewers praised her confidence and clarity, calling it refreshing in a political world full of empty talk. Others accused her of being overly confident or dismissive. But even critics agreed on one thing: she knew exactly what she was saying. This wasn't a viral moment built on outrage. It was a viral moment built on strategy. And that's what made people pay attention. Because in modern politics, the person who understands the numbers often controls the outcome. And Jasmine Crockett made it clear she believes she's one of those people.
What made Jasmine Crockett's statement even more powerful was the timing. This didn't come during a campaign rally or a private fundraiser. It came on a national daytime show, in front of an audience that doesn't usually hear raw political strategy spoken out loud. That's why many observers believe this wasn't accidental. In recent weeks, Crockett has been gaining more visibility across major media platforms. Her interviews have become sharper, more focused, and more forward-looking. Instead of reacting to criticism or defending positions, she's been framing conversations around control, preparation, and outcomes. On The View, she didn't argue hypotheticals. She spoke as if the landscape was already mapped out. Political commentators noted that this kind of language usually comes from people who feel secure in their data. Campaigns spend millions to understand voter behavior, turnout patterns, and demographic shifts. When someone says they know the numbers, they're signaling that those internal calculations are already done. And Crockett didn't stop there. By adding, "and I know how to win," she moved beyond analysis into execution. That line suggested confidence not just in information, but in strategy. Knowing numbers without knowing how to act on them means nothing. Winning requires turning information into movement. This is where reactions started to shift. Supporters saw her as a disciplined, modern political figure who understands how elections actually work in today's environment. Someone who doesn't rely on hope alone, but on planning and turnout. To them, this was proof of readiness. Critics, however, heard something else. They heard a challenge. In politics, certainty is often treated as arrogance, especially when it comes from someone who doesn't fit the traditional mold of power. Some commentators questioned whether her confidence would alienate undecided voters, but even those critics admitted that her message landed. The conversation online quickly moved from what she said to what she might be preparing for. Was this just commentary or positioning for something bigger? Was she speaking only about past victories or future ones? What stood out most was that she didn't clarify or walk back the statement afterward. No follow-up explanations, no softening. The message was allowed to stand exactly as it was delivered. That silence added weight. In modern media cycles, politicians rush to explain themselves. Crockett didn't. and that choice made the moment feel deliberate. By the end of the segment, one thing was clear. This wasn't about winning an argument on television. It was about signaling confidence to people who understand how power actually shifts. And that's why this moment didn't fade after one news cycle. It stayed in the conversation.
As the discussion around Jasmine Crockett's comments continued, one detail became impossible to ignore. She never treated the moment as controversial. There was no attempt to soften the message or reframe it for critics. Instead, the statement stood on its own, and the conversation moved forward around it. That's often a sign of confidence rooted in preparation. In the days following the appearance, political coverage didn't focus on emotional reactions. It focused on implications. Analysts began asking what kind of internal data leads someone to speak so directly on national television, because politicians who aren't sure rarely talk like that. Crockett's wording suggested she wasn't trying to persuade skeptics in that moment. She was speaking to people who already understand the system: donors, organizers, strategists, voters who pay attention to turnout, margins, and ground games. In other words, she wasn't talking to everyone. She was talking to the people who matter when elections are decided. That's why the phrase, "I know how to win," carried more weight than it appeared to at first. Winning isn't about speeches or viral clips. It's about organization, timing, and execution. It's about understanding where effort produces results and where it doesn't. Her confidence implied that those decisions are already being made. Whether this moment marks the beginning of a larger move or simply reinforces her current position, it clearly shifted how people talk about her. She is no longer being discussed only in terms of commentary or presence. She's being discussed in terms of strategy, and that's a meaningful change. In politics, perception often follows power. People start to listen differently when they believe someone knows where they're going. Crockett's statement didn't promise outcomes. It implied readiness. That distinction matters. As the news cycle moves on, this moment may not dominate headlines, but it will be remembered by those who track patterns, because statements like this are rarely isolated. They usually appear before action, not after. For now, one thing is certain: Jasmine Crockett didn't go on television to make noise. She went on television to send a message, and judging by the reaction, it was heard.